Today? Well, I can't actually see you, but I'm assuming there's a whole raft of people joining outside. So welcome, lovely to have you here. I'm Rebecca Graham and I will be your Master of Ceremonies or host for today's Kōrero for Change webinar. I've got an amazing lineup, so I'm very excited to listen to everybody. Shall we, before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things to just go through. So firstly, actually, a huge, massive thank you to our funders. Really appreciate your work, and it is those funders who make the series possible. So a big shout out to Spectrum Foundation, Foundation North, J.R. Mackenzie Trust, and Whaikaha Ministry of Disabled People. Thank you for your support and for supporting us to be able to provide this webinar series to a whole range of people. It's really valued. We'd also like to recognise our friends at People First New Zealand for their invaluable support in creating the Easy Read program. Thank you for that. I'm a big fan of Easy Read and it is a very important skill to have, and really important that we can make things like our program and information accessible. So thank you, People First. Today's focus is Aotearoa New Zealand's social support and welfare system. We'll be exploring the role of social support and welfare in building access and equity for disabled people. We've invited a range of thought leaders, academics, experts, policymakers, deaf, neurodivergent and disabled people, tangata whakaha Māori and whānau haua to join us in having some courageous conversations about ableism in the social support and welfare system and what needs to change. After each panel, you'll have a chance to ask questions. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen and type your question in there. If you need to ask your question by speaking or signing, please use the raise hand function and then our team will enable your audio and your video. Captions are available in two ways. You can either click on the captions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you can use the live transcript link that's been dropped into the chat. Our team will also put into the chat links to the program for today in alternative formats. So if you'd like one of those alternative formats, you should be able to find that now in the chat. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be made publicly available on the Access Matters website. By staying with us, you're giving your consent to be recorded. That brings us to the end of our housekeeping. And before we move into the presentations, I would like to welcome us into this space with a karakia. I love karakia because it's a lovely way of just moving us into and from and between different spaces. And through opening with a karakia, what we're doing is we're setting up the space and saying, now we're moving into the space and these discussions by closing with a karakia again, moving people out of that space. So I will open with a karakia first in Te Reo Māori and then I'll say it in English. Hia noi tātou. He karakia te matanga. Mauri oho, Mauri tū, Mauri ora kia tātou. Haumai e hui e tae kia.
Tae kia.
And in English, life force awaken, life force stand tall, life force vitality for all present. Let us join, gather and entwine. It's now my absolute pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Prudence Walker. Prudence is the Disability Rights Commissioner for the Human Rights Commission. With over 20 years working in and around human rights, Prudence's work is driven by a strong belief in social justice. Prudence grew up in Wairarapa, Taranaki, North Otago, and currently resides in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. She brings lived experience as a queer disabled person and a fundamentally intersectional approach. She has over 25 years of advisory and governance experience, is a strategic thinker, and has a strong people focus. Prudence was previously the Chief Executive of Disabled Persons Assembly and holds several training, rights, values, and leadership-based roles within the disability sector. She is, as I said, currently the New Zealand Human Rights Commissioner for Disability Rights, which is a big mouthful, but I will now hand over to Prudence. Thank you so much for joining us. Really looking forward to hearing from you. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora, Rebecca. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. E whānau mai ahau ki Papioia, ke o tatahi i noho ana. Ko kai hautu te kahauatanga mō te kahui, tika tangata ki Aotearoa. Ko Prudence Whakatakunga. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm grateful to join this important conversation about how we design accessible, just, and equitable income and social support systems. It continues a conversation I hosted just last week on International Day of Persons with Disabilities, highlighting some research commissioned by MSD about the factors underlying the financial hardship too many tangata whaikaha Māori, tangata iwi malo, and disabled people experience. And of course, that conversation built on work over decades by advocates, by the community, developing, enabling good lives, by the recommendations of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to the New Zealand Government, and the recommendations of the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, to name a few. We have some good evidence about what would make a difference and what we could do. So why haven't we made more progress? Well, in short, ableism. Ableism is described in lots of ways, but essentially it's a system that devalues and discriminates against us as disabled people, that sees our unique ways of being in the world as a problem to be fixed or sidelined, that sets low expectations of us, our capabilities and contributions, and that puts priority on non-disabled people by designing a world without us or consideration of what works for us. That inevitably shapes and shows up in our social and income support systems in many ways. For example, that although we might be consulted sometimes, we have no meaningful role in designing those systems, or if we do, it can then be perceived as being biased or self-serving. It shows up in overlooking the biases non-disabled people bring to system design. For example, if we advocate for a system that is flexible and that adapts to our circumstances or impairments, that can be seen as too loose, too risky, or likely to be abused. The risks and costs to us of a lack of self-determination and flexibility do not carry the same weight in decisions. It shows up in combination with racism and colonisation when tangata whaikaha Māori and whānau are made to fit a system not designed with or by them to embed tikanga and collective values. It shows up in the medical nature of disability allowances, in what is viewed as a valid disability cost, and in who decides, and also in the fact that even when the cost is recognised, the full costs will not be met. Ableism is a system of thinking that positions us as unlikely to contribute, and therefore as an expense, a financial burden that is not sustainable, that must be rationed or contained. It shows in the unspoken but pretty clear message that we should be grateful for what we get, expect to live modestly or in poverty. We should accept that that is just the way it is, except that although we have signed the convention and recognise a social model of disability, we will continue to be seen as a problem, and that we cannot afford to overhaul social systems such as inaccessible transport or housing or rigid abatement rules that create barriers for us. And it shows up in a system that treats being part of a community as a nice to have, part of community as a nice to have, not an essential right, and not as a means for us to maintain or improve our health or make our contributions. And that flows through and shows up in the capped funding for disability support services, in the lack of value that is put on people that support us, the difficult systems we and they have to navigate to access what are often the minimal reasonable accommodations we should be able to expect as of right. Part of upholding the obligations the government has entered into when signing up to the convention is using maximum available resources to advance our rights. Our right to a decent standard of living, our right to habilitation and rehabilitation, and our right to live in and be included in the community. I'm really looking forward to the discussion and ideas from this great lineup about making those rights a reality for every disabled person every day. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Prudence. Thank you so much for speaking. It was great to hear. Ticking over already the ideas around, the meaningful role in deciding systems. And yet, even if you do have a meaningful role, you're framed as biased, yet non-disabled are framed as unbiased. There's a lot to unpack in there, but I shall move on and introduce our second speaker, Mojo Mathers. Mojo Mathers is the current Chief Executive of the Disabled Persons Assembly and is a prominent disability rights leader here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. A former Green Party Member of Parliament from 2011 to 2017, Mojo made history as New Zealand's first deaf MP. In her parliamentary career, she championed accessibility and within public policy and the rights of disabled people, advocating for live captioning and sign language interpretation in Parliament. I'm old enough to remember that, and it was fascinating to watch the resistance that there was to a very basic accessibility accommodation. Under her leadership at DPA, Mojo continues to drive systemic change. Her vision includes amplifying the collective voice of disabled people, strengthening DPA's organisational capacity, and ensuring meaningful engagement between disabled communities and government decision makers. In recognition of her services to the disability community, she was appointed a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2019. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Mojo. Mojo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Tēnā koutou, ko Mōsiamete Sahau. I really welcome this opportunity to speak today, as too many disabled people and our families are not able to access the social support we need to live with dignity. And I want to start by actually talking about employment because of the close relationship between ableism in employment and ableism in social welfare. For most non-disabled people, gaining employment is the main way they sustain themselves financially. But as we know, disabled people face major barriers to obtaining employment. And this is reflected in the fact that working age disabled people have less than half the employment rate of non-disabled people. In June 2025, the employment rate for disabled people was at 38.2%, compared with 78.5% for non-disabled people. A massive, massive employment gap of more than 40 percentage points. These statistics show that we are a long, long way from achieving employment equity for disabled people. And combined with the additional cost of living with a disability, this means that disabled people and our families are far more likely to live in poverty and in material hardship, and hence need to access income and social support. But At the same time as facing discrimination and barriers to accessing employment, disabled people are also faced with navigating a social welfare support system that is not set up for us to access equitably. Many are faced with grappling with a system that is inaccessible and inflexible from the moment we try to connect, through to attending appointments with WIN staff and meeting job seeker obligations. At DPA, we often hear about the extremely high levels of anxiety that disabled people experience when engaging with social welfare. And this anxiety is because for disabled people, every requirement, every obligation comes with multiple barriers to meeting them, and these are all too often not recognised by WIN staff. These barriers might include digital barriers to accessing online information, communication barriers when engaging with WIN staff, difficulty to accessing transport to get to a meeting, and the assumption underpinning the whole system. A clear example is the presumption that all people on job seeker support are able to work. That's why they're on job seekers, right? But as evidenced by the disability employment gap, the reality is that disabled people on job seekers are trying to find work in an employment market that is antagonistic to employing disabled people. And on top of this, many disabled people on job seekers find themselves pressured by WIN to take on jobs that they cannot sustain because of their disability, and as a result are set up to fail in these roles. So, for example, we know of a neurodiverse person who told Work and Income that they could not work in a front-facing role due to social anxiety. But despite this, they were then placed in a customer service role, which of course they could not keep up and ended up leaving. And this led to their benefit being cut. This is a clear case of a system refusing to listen to a disabled person and forcing them into roles they're not suited for. This is ableism and needs to change. Not sustainable for the disabled person, nor is it sustainable for the employer, who may end up being reluctant to take on another disabled employee. We are also aware of WIN staff advising disabled beneficiaries to ask for support from whānau and family for transport and food. And this is particularly unjust, as surely the point of having a social welfare system is to have a place where people can receive support without forcing them to seek this from families in whānau who may also be struggling themselves. So the cumulative impact of having to navigate an inaccessible and ableist social welfare system, while at the same time as being effectively locked out of employment, creates a double whammy for many disabled people that over time takes a serious toll on our mental and physical health and well-being. So what needs to change? Like Prudence said before, the system needs to be designed in genuine partnership with disabled people, that it's informed by our experiences and our lens. And in the meantime, there are some immediate changes that are desperately needed. The first is we need to repeal benefit sanctions and current job seeker obligations, as they create unnecessary harm for far too many disabled people. We need to develop customised and tailored approaches led by disabled people to supporting disabled people into employment. We need to provide ongoing training for frontline WIN staff in disability responsiveness. And we need to remove the existing barriers to accessing the Child Disability Allowance and Disability Allowance and raise them significantly to reflect the real cost of living with a disability in an inaccessible and ableist society. Thank you very much. Ngā mihi.
Thank you so much, Mojo. I was on mute, so you wouldn't have been able to hear me, but I was cheering away loudly listening to that and absolutely 100% agree with repealing sanctions, improving the benefit system, and absolutely for ongoing training and disability responsiveness. That's something you've touched on, and certainly the experience as a parent is seeing the way in which disability gets misread and misrepresented and misinterpreted by people who have unfamiliarity with disability. So thank you so much for sharing. And I shall move on to introducing our next speaker, which is Ricardo Menendez-Mart. And Ricardo is the spokesperson for social development for the Green Party. Ricardo entered Parliament in 2020 and has been a strong advocate for welfare reform, immigration justice, and human rights. Raised in Tijuana, Mexico, he witnessed firsthand the impacts of climate change, inequality, and border division. These experiences have shaped his lifelong commitment to social and climate justice. Before entering Parliament, Ricardo worked alongside people receiving income support to campaign for livable incomes, better public services, and migrant participation in fertility justice. His proudest achievement from this time was leading the successful campaign to remove sanctions on single mothers who were being penalised for not naming fathers. Many of these mothers were survivors of abuse. In his first term, Ricardo shepherded the Human Rights, Disability Assist Dogs Non-Discrimination Amendment Bill into law, strengthened protections for migrant workers, and secured amendments supporting rainbow athletes. His advocacy has delivered benefit increases, expanded residency pathways for tens of thousands of migrants, and influenced government positions on welfare, dental care, and exploitation reform. Therefore, I'm very pleased to introduce Ricardo and welcome him to this kōrero. And Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Kia ora, Rebecca. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to mihi to Mojo and Prudence and actually to Access Matters and everybody joining here today. Thank you so much for having me. Look, I wanted to pick up where Mojo left, and because for us and the Greens, one of the things that we've been very passionate and steadfast about is the need to completely overhaul our welfare system so that it allows people to live with dignity. And the stuff that Mojo talked about in terms of the operation of benefit sanctions and the stripping of dignity of disabled people within the welfare system is so poignant. We've been really lucky to be led by our Inclusive Greens members, who many have experience of being on welfare. And whenever we discuss what are the issues that tend to matter for our network when it comes to issues within the welfare system, one thing that comes often is the medicalization within the welfare system, which other speakers have talked about. And I know that we've identified a lot of problems within the previous speakers. And I think for me, I want us to dream about where can we go next. And for me, that looks like completely overhauling the way we categorize benefits and medicalize welfare assistance, and instead create a system that allows everybody to have livable incomes, where we don't ask people to continue proving that they are disabled in order to have access to things like the supported living payment, and a system that often is even hard to get a GP appointment to produce the documentation to renew your supported living payment, and one where the assistance that's provided by the front line genuinely is flexible and is mandated to uphold one's rights to a life with dignity and to fully participate in our communities. And I want to emphasize that last bit, because the economy is made up of all of us, and our relationships actually with each other and the world are part of the economy. As others spoke about, a lot of things are being treated as nice to have. out going to see a movie, going to see mates, and these are things that work and income should not treat as luxuries, but as rather enabling people to fully participate in their lives and in the broader economy, which is made up of all of us. And one of the ways that we can achieve that is by overhauling the purpose and principles of the Social Security Act, the legislation that effectively tells work and income how to do its job. Because right now, we've just even by the way that law is written, have created a system where work and income is only mandated to eliminate hardship, to alleviate hardship, aroha mai, as opposed to eliminate hardship. And there are no provisions that ensures that work and income case managers, when they are using their discretion, are effectively told to use that discretion to maximize assistance as opposed to gatekeep it. And I think that's one of the areas I'd love to move into welfare reform. And that was something that actually the Welfare Expert Advisory Group was really clear on the need to start by overhauling the very same principles and the purpose of the Social Security Act. And the last thing I want to touch on specifically in terms of dreaming about what's next is changing the relationship roles within work and income. And that is because we've seen too many disabled people being made financially dependent on whoever work and income deems their partner and losing their financial interdependence as a result of that. This is a massive gap within the system, and it needs to end. We need to create a welfare system that upholds the individual dignity of people and allows people to have the agency to choose who they wish to relate to, as opposed to locking them in financial dependency to whoever work and income deems they're in a relationship, quote, in the nature of marriage. So I hope those areas I touched on can leave us with something to fight for as we head for next year, because I genuinely believe that our welfare system can be there to uphold the dignity of all of us, as opposed to stripping it from each other, and particularly targeting disabled people within the welfare system as well. So kia ora. Thanks for having me.
Kia ora, Ricardo. Thank you so much for sharing. I absolutely 100% agree around the relationship rules. That has just continued to be a real issue, and particularly for women who end up in quite difficult and abusive situations and then can't leave. So I would love to see that changed completely and utterly. Next, we have our first panel. So thank you very much to all our speakers for coming and sharing their insights. And I am going to hand over to Debbie Ward, disability advocate, who will be hosting the panel, the first panel, the creators. So Debbie, all yours.
Oh, kia ora, Rebecca. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you today our panelists, who are the creator panel. And as they come up on the screen, I will introduce them to you, and they will have 5 minutes for their to respond to the initial, introduce themselves and respond to the initial question. And then there'll be a time for question and answers after each of the panelists have had a chance to speak. So we have Lisa Martin, who is the Director for Complex Care Group Trust, Nick Ruane, who's a disability rights advocate, and Lātua Halato Talagi, sorry, Lātua, who's part of the Enabling Good Lives group. Welcome, panelists. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today, and I will hand it straight over to you, Lisa, to introduce yourself and then respond to the question: what is the role of social support and welfare system in the process of access and belonging for people with disabilities?
Thank you. My name is Lisa Martin. I'm the Director of Complex Care Group Trust and President of the New Zealand Federation of Disability Information Centres. And I'm also mum to a young man, 31 years old, with various disabilities. What is the role of the social support and welfare system in promoting inclusion and belonging for people with disabilities and access needs? There are many examples of the famous quotation that the measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable members. The term vulnerable is contentious and debatable, but the intent of the quotation is understood. We therefore find ourselves in late 2025 with a turbulent and confronting history related to our support of disabled people in Aotearoa, New Zealand. In the late 1800s, there was a perception, horrifying by today's standards, and please do not shoot the messenger, that disabled people may not be able to contribute to society, may not be able to help build the New Zealand of the early 1800s. We know today that these social paradigms were unfounded and misconstrued. What followed, though, was institutionalisation and the othering of disabled people. This attitude drove a charity model of disability, that people with disabilities should be grateful for any support that they received. Again, to reiterate, these attitudes are abhorrent, but it is important to know where we have come from in order to see where we are now and into the future. The rights-based movement of the 1970s to today drove forward a recognition of the value and the contribution of disabled people. However, we still see today a model of welfare support that is somewhat restrictive and punitive, with increasing eligibility requirements and means testing. I must acknowledge, though, as a quasi-self-educated macroeconomist, the overall costs of health and disability and aged care are huge for many countries, including New Zealand. We do have a declining population and declining immigration. I believe, though, that it is crucial to be equitable in our approach to welfare support. Aged care, disability supports, long-term chronic health conditions, mental health supports, and ACC must be viewed through an equal lens. What can we as a country do to ensure that quality supports are provided for these communities, for our people? How do we as a country increase income and perhaps reduce unnecessary expenditure to ensure that supports go to New Zealanders who need additional support to live a good and ordinary life? The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Disability Strategy expound these rights of New Zealanders to this support. I'm intensely interested in how we deliver this in 2025 and the years ahead. True, we have economically challenging circumstances, but let's remind ourselves, what is the measure of a society? Thank you.
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Thank you very much for that. Nick, we'll move on to you now to introduce yourself and respond to the question, what is the role of social support and welfare system in the process of access and belonging for people with disabilities?
Kia ora. Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, I looked at this question a little bit through some of the work that I've been doing recently. But I also looked at it from the perspective of what role disabled people play in society as well. So, I mean, I think ultimately the role of the social support system is critical in many of our lives. Many people in the disability community touch the social support system. So it obviously has a critical role in many people's lives. I've been doing a little bit of work in the last little bit around the total mobility system. That's obviously a critical part. And I think when we don't have access to good social support, it's really limiting on our lives. It means that we don't have the ability to go out into society and to participate either in the community and employment or in any other parts of society. When we're seen as a burden, which has been mentioned before, that is limiting on our participation. When we're seen as a cost, that's ultimately negative to society, because disabled people are as the latest census has shown, a significant part of our society. We have a significant contribution to make through employment, through social participation. So the social security system has a role to play to enable our participation, to enable us to go into employment, to enable us to have the right social supports in place to allow that to occur. At the moment, it's pretty clear that those supports are not in place, or that they're being devalued, and that they're just not in place correctly. They're being either defunded or incorrectly put in place. And I think those are some of the big challenges that we'll hopefully have a conversation about today, how we can have a better say in how those supports are designed and put into place. I think just about the work I'm doing around total mobility, that's a key part of many people's lives. And that's clearly under threat. But there's many others around income support that needs to change, and hopefully we'll have a further discussion about that. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora, Nick. Thank you for that. And we'll just move on to La Toa now. So La, what is the role of social support and welfare system in the process of access and belonging for people with disabilities? Oh, you might want to put your microphone off mute. And just while La Toa is sorting out his microphone, for viewers, if you've got any questions that you would like to ask of any of these three panelists, please don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A box on your screen. Just wonder if one of the administrators might be able to help with unmuting La Toa. I think there's a few technical issues happening here. Gotta love technology when you need it the most.
I can't see Kimberly here. I tell you what, maybe if we go through to Q&A for a little bit,
Yes.
and then hopefully Latoa, we can work out how to unmute him. Thank you.
Great. So we have a question here. Apologies. There we go. Lost the questions for a second there. So we have a question from June. What if someone has a severe disability who cannot work at all? They're then put on the living supported payment and the disability allowance, which both benefits are capped. And the individual, who has severe disabilities cannot get extra supports to help them at home or in the community. Just wondering, Lisa or Nick, have you got a response for June?
Lisa speaking. Look, it's a very, very pertinent issue. Complex care groups supports those with very high and complex disability needs in their families, and we are experiencing the effects of inflation. The cost of living is huge, and the reality is that the current benefit system is not supporting the current day-to-day costs of living, let alone any other enablers for disabled people to access the community, as other speakers have said, is actually their right. It's not just a nice to have, it's actually a right to access community. I completely agree with June. It's a cost of living issue, and the benefit values need to be increased.
Thanks, Lisa. Nick, you're on mute. I'm not sure if you were talking then.
Yeah, no, thank you. Good question, June. Thank you. There was a recent report just delivered last week that talked about the cost of disability, and that's something that I have been putting a little bit of work into, thinking about how we lift our main benefits that disabled people receive to reflect the cost of disability, because we all know that there is a cost that disabled people take on that almost no one else takes on as a result of our disabilities. And I think we really need to see our main benefits that disabled people receive lifted or uplifted to reflect that cost. So I'd really be advocating strongly that our main benefits, our supported living payments, our job seeker health condition and disabilities, the child disability, the disability allowance, all be uplifted to reflect that cost of disability, just to provide that floor for the costs that we are all experiencing.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Nick. June has a second question here for us, for the panel as well. Why are work and income using a GP's report assessment, which is how you are eligible for one of the benefits? Why can't they use or access specialist reports or behaviour support specialists, so it shows what behaviours are associated with that person? Any comments you'd like to make
I
on
think
that?
that's actually a good idea, June. My understanding, at least in terms of the supported living payment, is that the primary assessment criteria for that is whether or not the disabled person is able to work 15 hours or more per week in open employment. But you're absolutely right. Actually, perhaps we should be considering behavioural assessments, for example, because purely basing this on a medical assessment would be challenging, I think, particularly given that GPs are general practitioners and will not necessarily be seeing all of the various different nuances of that person's disability, and therefore the impact on their ability to work.
You're quite right, Lisa. It ties back into what our previous speakers have already talked to around those unconscious biases, ableism, and the medicalisation of the system. Nick,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts about, as the question from David, what's your thoughts about the disability allowance being renamed to disability cost?
Yeah, I think we do need to put a bit of time into thinking about what we call it. I think what we call it is not as important as how much what the quantum is, what the actual dollar amount is. But I'm open to to changing the name of it. It's been around for a very long time, and yeah, I think that we should probably spend a bit of time thinking about what we call it, because what we call it is a direct reflection of how we think about it. And I think we should probably have a good conversation about what we call it. But I think the more important question is how much is it, what its dollar value is, and I think that's probably where we need to spend the most amount of time, because we haven't looked at the dollar value of the disability allowance for a very, very long time, and that's where we need to spend the most time. But absolutely, let's look at what we call it.
Nice. Thanks, Nick, and I agree with that as well. So we're still having some technical issues with Latour's sound. However, Latour, if there's anything you would like to viewers to hear, I'm happy to read something out in the chat, if that helps. So while you're typing away, if you have an introduction you'd like to make or some thoughts you'd like to make, I do have a question for Lisa and Nick about Lisa, I really enjoyed the quote you used at the start of your introduction, which is the measure of society is how society treat the most vulnerable members. Paraphrase that. I'm not sure if I got that correct. Um, but what is it that your organisation, Complex Care Group, does to assist the people that you support or the whānau that you support to get the best out of our social support systems and to ensure that the whānau, the parents, and their children or adult child are actually belonging have that sense of belonging in the community.
Absolutely. Thank you, Debbie. Lisa speaking. A lot of the work that Complex Care Group does is helping families to navigate what is actually quite a complicated disability support system in New Zealand. Some eligibilities will impact on others, and oftentimes it might require a sit down or an online meeting with families to really burrow down into what those challenges might be. A good example of this is the point at which a young person leaves school, because they are evolving, if you like, from a community, a sort of a community environment where sometimes supports and information is conveyed by the school, and they're emerging from that into wider society. They might at that time be eligible for a revised needs assessment to make certain that they are getting the optimum disability support services that they might be eligible for, and of course a work and income support, because at that time of life, for example, there might be many other changes that are taking place. How will they be spending their days? Will they be using their post-schooling OARS funding if they're eligible to do that, if they have very high needs OARS funding? Will they be considering leaving home perhaps? There's many different variables woven into that process. So for us at Complex Care Group, it's a question of really burrowing into what is their current situation and what is the goal that they're trying to achieve, and helping them navigate that.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Oh, and it sounds like we've got some sound coming through from Lātua.
Kia ora,
Kia ora.
and my humble apology for technology. It was working before the webinar started. Yes, I'll speak briefly on the Envio information. I have my involvement with the Te Ropu Waiora as the chair, relatively a new organization, charitable organization. And of course, my role in the Enabling Good Lives leadership. Speaking briefly about the Te Ropu Waiora, this is our main goal is to try and build and develop the voices of persons with disabilities and their families, and the provider environment in the area of empowering disabled people to be able to make informed choices and control over the support services that they require. We are talking at the moment about the system needing to be more responsive, but on the other hand, we need to make sure that empowerment of the voices of persons with disabilities also developed. And that goes back to the twin track approach, which was talked about in terms of enabling organizations of persons with disabilities to play a role in the development of services and any social development programs. As Sir Robert Martin has talked about in his role as the Disability Convention Committee, that if you are not able to say that you have choice or control over who you live with and where you live, then you are in an institution. So one of the main areas for change is to look at closing institutions and making sure that resources go into developing alternative ways of inclusion. Now, we've had the recognition of the CRPD now coming to 20 years since it was adopted, and New Zealand has recognized this important legal document for development, and it's now we need to test ongoing politically and throughout the society. It's not long ago when the supported living pension was called the invalid's benefit. Now that reflects the history of where we've come from, in that persons with disabilities were regarded as unable to work or they were sick. So within the work going ahead, we need to change the mindsets of our society so they do not continue to exclude persons with disabilities in development programs. That is real development, not projects or short-term services that continue to exclude persons with disabilities. And at the global level, we don't need to look too far back when persons with disabilities were excluded from the Millennium Development Goals. And it's only as far back as 2000 when leaders and persons with disabilities advocated for the convention, UNCRPD. Now we have that in 2006, and we have our opportunity with our government recognizing the UNCRPD, and that is a great tool to drive our development, social development, and welfare system, which is historically based on a charity model and medical. So going forward, I'm glad that we're in a better place this time than we were last month. In particular, our New Zealand Disability Strategy now includes the Enabling Good Lives mission and principles, 8 principles. If we look at our social support system and the welfare system, it's not mana enhancing. It's not simple to understand and use. And many of the principles in Enabling Good Lives, we don't measure up to. So hopefully that we're in a new place now, that we have the strategy in place. Enabling Good Lives has been included, and we can all kickstart and resume where we were before the pause of Enabling Good Lives. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Aotearoa. Well said, actually. Integrating the Enabling Good Lives into the New Zealand Disability Strategy, I believe, is going to be key to creating some change within our government departments. So we do have a question here from a couple of people about the frustration that occurs for us as disabled people when we have to reprove every 2 years that our impairments are still exist. And the question is the why do we have to do that? But you may not be able to answer the why, but just some of your thoughts on how you might like to see that shifted and changed. Maybe Aotearoa, we'll go to you first.
Okay, am I still unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay. As a blind person, this is one of the ongoing areas of frustration. When you're blind, it stays a permanent condition. But at times, we are required to prove that you're blind. Of course, that's on a regular basis. Hopefully, that type of unnecessary administrative process is eliminated because it's not mana enhancing. It's also builds to the anxiety of having to to prove that you have a disability and it's permanent. So what is the situation? Why is it remaining a policy to have administrative processes to prove that you have a disability when it's a permanent condition?
Thank you. Nicole, Lisa, would you like to comment on that at all? Or?
Yeah, I'm happy to have a crack at this one.
Thanks, Nick.
I think for those of us with permanent lifelong disabilities, like Lātoa, I have permanent and lifelong impairments. I think this is a fairly easy one, that those should just be, once you establish that you have a permanent lifelong impairment, that should be that. You should never have to reprove that again. The real nub of the issue is for people that have impairments that come and go, that ebb and flow. That's where it gets a little bit tricky. And I think that we do need to have some co-design and some discussion about that. And I think that's where actually disability community can be really helpful with government and can actually sit down and have a meaningful conversation with government about that issue, rather than having government say, this is what we're going to do. This is the solution we're going to impose upon you because we think it's cheaper to do it this way, which is usually how they go. That disability community can sit down with government and have an actual meaningful conversation about the nature of impairment and how it interacts with the benefit system. And I feel like that could actually lead to a really interesting response and action. Because usually when government sits down with disability community and they have a meaningful discussion, interesting results come out the other end. And when they sit down as partners, that's when the interesting conversations happen. So that would be what I'd like to see around this one, because this is actually quite an interesting situation. There's no clear-cut answer to this one, and that's where we need to actually start focusing on. So that would be my challenge.
Nice, thanks, Liz. Nick, sorry, I was just looking at Rebecca. I think we're just about at the end of the time for our questions, but I do want to thank you as panelists for your time. Very thrilled, Latour, that you were able to have your say and hear your voice. I do ask if you've got some time behind the scenes, once the session is finished, to go into the Q&A box in the chat box and reply to some of the questions. There's some really great questions coming through, and we just don't have time to answer them all here in this panel right now. But thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. And thank you again to Lisa and Nick and Lātoa. It was so good to hear from you all. And it was before we all join, we're all on early as panelists and checking our mics and checking our videos and everything's working. And then, of course, you come to it and something just does not work, which is always a bit of a panic. So all credit to Latour for persevering and figuring out what was going on, and then still coming back with this very thoughtful, reasoned a response or offering. So thank you so much for that. We are now moving to our second panel, and I will introduce the moderator for the thinkers. And so it is my great pleasure to welcome Áine Kelly Costello, who is a blind advocate, a researcher and writer. I always enjoy Áine's writing. So over to you, Áine, as the moderator.
Tēnā koe, Rebecca, and ngā mihi to everyone who's put this webinar together. So I have the pleasure of introducing the second panel. So we, again, will have the same format that we just went through, with speakers having 5 minutes each to speak, and then a Q&A afterwards, but you can write your questions as we go, if you like, into the Q&A. And then afterwards, if you have a question that you need to put your hand up for, you can do that, and one of the assistants managing the Zoom can do that if writing the question is difficult. So our three panelists, with any apologies for any mispronunciation, Kelly Mercier, Deputy Director of the Helen Clark Foundation, will be up first, followed by Dr. Huhana Hiki. The bio I have in front of me here says academic and disability rights lawyer. Huhana has lots of amazing hats. And now Rebecca is also changing hats. So Dr. Rebecca Graham is the co-chair for Access Matters Aotearoa and author of the always very informative Dr. Beck's Substack. So if you can all reply to the same question that we had before, which is, what is the role of social support and welfare in the process of access and belonging for people with disabilities? And I reckon if you feel like that's been answered already or something, maybe you could even go into, why is it not working? What is making us get stuck here? Because I know we have some particularly good system thinkers on this panel. So yeah, with that, I'd love to hand the floor to Kelly. Kia ora.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kali Mercier toko ingoa. I'm Deputy Director at the Helen Clark Foundation, which is a non-partisan public policy think tank. My role is to research and write about, I guess, pressing issues of the day that have to do with the long-term sustainability of New Zealand. And I recently wrote a report about ageing in New Zealand and access to housing and aged care facilities for older people, which is why I think I came onto the radar as a potential speaker for today's webinar. But actually, I've been asked to talk today about my personal experiences with disability and how those have been supported, or probably rather not supported, by the current system. So I have two children now in their teens who've been chronically ill for many years with myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, used to be known as Tapanui flu back in the day. My oldest daughter has been pretty much entirely off school for 6 years now. The youngest missed about 3 years, but has started going back to school a few hours a week, which is great. But they've both been extremely disabled by the illness. I'll talk more about my older daughter, as she's the worst off at the moment. So she's abed 22 to 24 hours a day, often with the curtains pulled because light tires are out. So we have to be silent at home because any noise or music tires her, and she's in constant pain, has nausea all the time, daily stomach pains and headaches, brain fog, cognitive dysfunction, is dizzy when she stands up. So she can't wash herself or doesn't have the energy to hold her arm up to brush her teeth, struggles to dress herself, and to leave the house she has to use a wheelchair. And we have to push her because she doesn't have cognitive energy to use an electric wheelchair, unfortunately. So yeah, we have to, I have to help her with all those things and bring her meals, her medications, and so on. And as a single mum with a full-time job, that's not always a straightforward exercise, but I'm very lucky to be able to work from home. So the reason I wanted to be able to talk about this is just because my children have a chronic illness, which is not classed as a disability. So we can't actually access disability supports in the same way that we would be able to do with a different diagnosis. There didn't seem to be any pathway of support for us at all other than regular visits to the paediatrician. We were sort of told they can't do anything to help. Just so the system has been opaque and unsupportive throughout, with the expectation that we'll just do absolutely everything and we'll do it without support. So we're also not entitled to a NASC assessment because it's not a disability, it's a chronic illness. We have managed to access supports eventually, but it's been very hard to get them, and we've missed years of support because the system's been sort of so opaque. So after 3 years, we found out we were entitled to a child disability benefit, which has been fantastic because we do spend hundreds of dollars per month on medications, doctor visits, and special food and so on. We also found out after about 2 years that we could access health schools, so we were able to get some schooling at home, which has been a real godsend and has sort of taken the pressure off in terms of having to worry about the schooling as well as all the other stuff. Last year we found out we could get a disability parking badge. We eventually managed to get a wheelchair from a friendly occupational therapist who said that officially we weren't entitled to one, but she took pity on us and had a spare we were able to use. So she wasn't entitled to it because she isn't going to school and she doesn't officially have a disability, even though she can only walk a few meters. So it's all very perplexing to me as a parent. And so I really wanted to get across today that I feel really strongly that disability should be assessed by function rather than a diagnosis. If a person's not able to look after themselves, it shouldn't matter if you have MS or ME or a rugby injury or autism. You really should be able to access equal or equivalent care. And that care should enable you to live in dignity. It should enable you not to be 100% reliant on having someone who's prepared to look after you. Yeah. I know there are numerous people out there with chronic fatigue and long COVID. I think 65,000 in New Zealand was the latest estimate right now, who are severely disabled, bedbound, unable to cook for themselves, unable to change their sheets, getting no support whatsoever, relying just on the kindness of friends or strangers. So I know this because they're on my Facebook groups and sort of talking daily about how hard it is for them to live or to have any kind of dignity. So I think it's outrageous. Yeah, so there's two main things that I thought needed to change in the role of social support, which was firstly that the access should be equitable. You should be able to get it based on what you need rather than being left in limbo because you have one diagnosis but not another diagnosis. And also that existing pathways to support should be clear and accessible and easy to navigate for everyone. So, I mean, I'm just really perplexed as why it took me so many years to work out what we were entitled to in terms of financial support, however limited, and things like a parking badge and a wheelchair. Why is there not some kind of navigational help for this? I'm a very driven kind of advocate for my children, and yet I really struggle daily to navigate the system. And I really shudder to think how families are getting on where they don't have the same kind of financial advantages and social connections that I have been lucky enough to have. Yeah, so that's my 10 cents worth. Thanks for listening.
Kia ora, Kelly. Thank you so much for sharing that. And if I'm allowed to say one thing as a moderator that's off of my moderation script, as someone who is blind and has long COVID and can access individualized funding and the non-means tested supported living, both because I am blind and wouldn't be able to otherwise with a chronic illness, I see this like duality every day and recognize how much privilege I have, but also that these things should not be privileges and that our kōrero around disability needs to be defined by the broadest community and welcoming and not doing the gatekeeping that government constantly plays into. So with that, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Huhanaki and also to talk about the role of the welfare system in access and belonging for disabled people. Kia ora hu.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Just don't mind me, I've got a bit of a cold, right in the middle of getting summer going, and I've got my first bloody cold of the year. Anyway, I thought my angle would come from actually having been on the Welfare Expert Advisory Group report, which I believe is still relevant today. And Kelly, I just want to say you've reminded me that I need to get a resource done around our rights, not from the government perspective, but all the different tricks and the things that we can claim and are entitled to as a resource to hand out. So it might be some project ahead of me on the way. But kia ora koutou. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about disabled beneficiaries and the findings of whakamana which was the Welfare Expert Advisory Group report, WEAG. I was a member of the WEAG team. This report represents one of the most comprehensive examinations of our welfare system in decades. It's reformative. And importantly, it centres around the most marginalised people in Aotearoa, including disabled, tangata whaikaha or whānau haua, the term I prefer, and those living with chronic health conditions. So the reality for disabled beneficiaries is WEAG's findings were stark. They show that more than half of people receiving a main benefit are living with a disability or long-term health condition or are caring for someone who is. So that kind of gets rid of that myth of laziness around beneficiaries. Most are dealing with a disability or they're caring for disabled or dealing with the issues that you were talking about, Kali. Despite this, the system wasn't built with disabled people in mind. WEAG highlighted significant income shortfalls of between $50 to $230 a week just to meet basic needs, and between $110 and $350 a week to allow even minimal participation in community life. These numbers reflect what many in this room already know, that disabled people face extra costs every day, costs related to transport equipment, medical appointments, housing accessibility, and simply maintaining independence. In short, the welfare system does not support disabled people to live with dignity, comfort, or security. So what about lived experience, the human impact? These challenges weren't abstract, they are deeply personal. When we went around the country, we heard very clearly why homeless people don't get welfare. They're too terrified and traumatized to even walk into the office and start to ask for the dignity of money in order to be able to live their lives. They can't go there. It's too difficult. They're not abstract, they're deeply personal. One person told WEAG, I can heat my home or buy the food I need. I can't do both. Another said, Windsor's harder to deal with than my disability. Others spoke of the exhaustion. Every week is a crisis. There is no breathing space. And of the costs, my benefit doesn't stretch to cover the extra costs of being disabled. It's like we're expected to live on less, even though everything costs more. And that wasn't more clear than during COVID, when all the workers got a benefit of a much higher rate and we were left to just struggle. It was suggested, why not give all beneficiaries like 1,000 during the beginning of COVID to get them a start so they can prepare like everyone else? That was denied us while everyone else was more important. The only reason disabled were protected in COVID was thanks to the shutdowns, but we certainly did not get the support that was needed. They've got the benefit doesn't stretch to cover the extra costs. So it's like we're expected to live on less, even though everything costs more. But these testimonials show us that the system itself is contributing to harm. Many people talk about stigma, judgment, and their emotional toll of constantly having to prove their needs. Some said the system made their health worse. That is unacceptable in a country that aspires to fairness and manaakitanga. So the WEAG called for, the title of the report is important, Whakamana, Restoring the Dignity of the People. WEAG's theme, we had volunteering. These themes actually came from all the interviews. So when you think about it, beneficiaries are a very busy people and they're not lazy on average. In fact, most are either volunteering, caring, earning, or learning. but clearly need financial support. WEAG's vision is for a welfare system that enables people to live with mana and participate fully in their communities, supports disabled people to thrive, not simply survive, acts as a function of well-being rather than a barrier to it. The recommendations included raising income support levels to meet the real living costs, remove relationship barriers, hugely important, recognising disability-related expenses and benefit entitlements, simplifying the system, removing unnecessary and punitive processes, integrating welfare with housing, health and disability supports. Sounds great, eh? And ensuring disabled people lead and co-design the reforms. In other words, WEAG is calling for a welfare system grounded in rights, inclusion and dignity, not sufficient suspicion and compliance. And Warren Forster, who wrote the ACC report, actually outlined a system that gives equity to disabilities, regardless of the causation, regardless whether you're born with it, acquire it, or, have an accident for it. They haven't implemented that either. And because Labor were very slow to implement WEAG, it doesn't exist in this current coalition, but it's still relevant and could exist if maybe we make that an election priority. Just a little hint there for those that are in political parties, just push it. So finally, what needs to change? Recommendations I've got, based on WEAG's findings on what disabled people continue to tell us, the path forward is clear. First, we must raise benefit levels to reflect actual costs of living and the added costs of disability. No one should have to choose between keeping warm and eating. Treat it like a pension, not a benefit. So like a senior pension, different set of rights, etc. Treat it like that. So it means if you do get a part-time job, you keep your benefit and you can earn extra when you're capable. It becomes fairer without penalty. Second, our welfare legislation and practice must explicitly embed disability rights and whānau, that dignity of accessing benefits. The system must stop treating disabled people as problems to manage. Third, we need a simplified, humane system. That means consistent decision-making, accessible processes, and removing punitive rules that create fear and instability. And fourth, accessible, secure, healthy housing must be part of the welfare conversation. Without stable housing, welfare cannot succeed. And fifth, support for participation must be flexible. Disabled people may have fluctuating health episodes. We do. Capacity to work or significant caring roles. Welfare settings should accommodate that reality, not punish it. And finally, disabled people must be at the centre of designing and governing wealth reforms. Nothing about us without us is not a slogan. It is a principle of rights-based policy. In closing, ultimately, whakamana is more than a report. It is a blueprint for a humane, inclusive, rights-based welfare system, one that upholds mana, recognises disability realities, enables full participation in whānau and community life. If we take these recommendations seriously, we can move from a welfare system that creates harm to one that genuinely supports well-being. Ngā mihi nui. Thank you, guys.
Tēnā
That's
koe,
me.
Dr. Who. Yeah, that's a fantastic blueprint. We know what the solutions are and we just need to get on with them. But I think there's a really interesting question in there as to what is actually systemically stopping us from getting on with them, which perhaps Dr. Vix might be able to pick up on now. Kia ora, Vix.
Kia ora, Anya. Thank you. And yes, I have a lot to say, and I'm going to squeeze it all into some very short minutes. So bear with me. So I'm actually going to pull out widely and think about things from a broader perspective. And to understand where we've got to now, we have to think about the system that we're all operating inside. And currently that is neoliberalism. There's a lot of different ways to define neoliberalism, but essentially it's an ideology that centres free markets, personal responsibility, and minimal government intervention. Neoliberalism as an ideology promises freedom and prosperity, but in practice it has produced inequity, has weakened and disrupted our social safety nets, and has shifted responsibility for structural problems onto individuals. Here in Aotearoa New Zealand, we've been living under neoliberalism since the mid-1980s. It's currently being intensified under the current environment, and the current government has aligned itself very strongly with the ideas promoted by the Atlas Network, which can be summarised as individual liberty, private property rights, small governments, and unregulated markets. And there's a deep belief behind these ideas that these are the path to prosperity and well-being for all. They're not. If you've read Hall and O'Shea, they talk about something called common sense neoliberalism. And this is the way in which these neoliberal ideas and thoughts and belief systems become so embedded into it shapes what we believe is possible. So instead of being able to think of solutions outside of neoliberalism, neoliberalism itself determines our solutions and what we do. This means that even our solutions can become constrained, and we've seen this being described so clearly in this webinar, the way in which the solutions are constrained by the idea of individualism, by the idea of economic productivity. Here in Aotearoa New Zealand, neoliberalism has found quite fertile ground because of our history of settler colonialism. And this history of settler colonialism has imported ideas around who we are, the idea of the self-reliant, independent Kiwi battler, the idea of our hard-working individuals who look after our own, a very narrow focus on the nuclear family rather than collective structures. So these settler colonial narratives make us more vulnerable as a society to neoliberal thinking. And together, both the settler colonialism and the neoliberalism enhance, support, create this idea that success and care are individual problems for individual people and their individual families, rather than being collective responsibilities and social responsibilities that require systemic efforts. If you've read any of the Treaty of Waitangi Tribunal claims, particularly around health and disability, they really starkly expose the state's insistence on settler colonial ideas about health and well-being and personhood, and how these ideas have harmed Māori in particular, but also how they have harmed disabled people and all of us through stripping away that collective care for one another, and these ideas around health and well-being and disability that go beyond medicalised notions. And we've already heard today how medicalising disability harms us all. Disability also disrupts that myth of the self-reliant individual. It reveals that none of us thrive alone, and that care is at its heart a relational practice. And yet, neoliberal and settler colonial ideas permeate disability support throughout. Some examples. People with intellectual or learning disabilities get treated as projects. They always have to have goals and to be continually improving themselves. Whenever there's a review of the goals. You have to have a goal that you're always working towards. You can't just be. Families become reduced down to natural supports. The focus becomes on their labour, which is assumed to be free, infinite, and endlessly exploitable. It is a profoundly undignifying way to frame families and whānau. Disabled people, as we've heard throughout this webinar already, have to constantly prove that they are disabled enough to be deserving of support. Neoliberalism offers only limited solutions for the complexities of whānau and care. It reduces everything down to cost and economic productivity. The outcome is always austerity, less universal support, more exploited labour, more pressure on families to fill the gaps, more expectation for disabled people and families to become economically productive units rather than living good lives. One of the challenges that we are facing at the moment is the way in which this neoliberal and economic idea has reduced care down to who's the employer and who's the employee, rather than considering whānau flourishing or individual well-being. Instead, the disabled person must become the employer of their family member, or a family member must employ another family member to provide care. This disrupts and undermines genuine relationships and replaces that care, that whānau, that sense of connection and belonging for one another with a strange employment-related relationship. So, what could we do instead? There are a whole lot of things that we could do if we reframe things and move away from these neoliberal ideas. We can recognise that care is a collective responsibility, a relational endeavour, and not individualise it onto one or two people. We can stop treating disabled people and framing disability as a cost centre, and instead acknowledge the full personhood and the diverse ways in which we all contribute to community beyond economic productivity. We can support whānau in ways that strengthen relationships, rather than forcing them into administrative, bureaucratic, or unpaid care roles. We can value universal supports. Dr. Who touched on this. We could treat disability payments like we do the pension. They could be universal, non-means tested, and not related to the income of our partner. And crucially, we could embed Indigenous frameworks of well-being, such as whānau ora, which understand belonging, connection, and relational care as fundamental to a good life. We can shift our thinking, we can shift our practice. I think of the work of Tariana Turia all those years ago in getting whānau ora across the line and into government policy. The shift in thinking that's occurred as we think about enabling good lives principles and how we might apply them in our everyday life. Inclusion and belonging for disabled people and families isn't achieved by pushing individuals harder or extracting more labour. It's achieved when our social support and welfare system recognises that we live interdependently, that we are relational beings, that community participation matters, and that everyone deserves the social conditions for thriving. If we move beyond neoliberal thinking and its narrow focus on individual responsibility, we can imagine and build a system that's grounded in dignity, equity, whanaungatanga, and collective well-being. Ngā mihi, over to you, Anya.
Tēnā koe, Rebecca, and tautoko all of that and everything that all the panelists have said. I love the focus on yeah, we can do those things if we know why the systems are broken and what needs to change. There is nothing inevitable. It is a matter of changing entrenched mindsets and political will, which is no easy feat, but is something that we can all collectively strive for. So I just thought to pick up on a couple of the questions that have been raised at one point or another. So a question that was in the previous panel but wasn't picked up then, so I thought maybe I could ask Huhana this one, was, are we promoting mahi on legal harmonisation between the CRPD and our laws?
The legal harmonisation, did you say?
I think what that's probably referring to is, are we going to get the CRPD into our international law?
Well, the opportunity's been there for decades. Labor didn't do it, National didn't do it last time, and this coalition's not doing it. So I guess that's the answer. We have to get the politicians on board, really. One of the biggest problems you've got is that the politicians did not want us. It's interesting because Warren was talking to caucus when the last lot were in, And they told him disabled get nothing unless they're forced to give it to us. I did the Hikoi of Hope March, and 6 months later, after we handed over the petition and lots of stories, we were given Whaikaha, the new ministry. They've gone and decimated that to a point that it's within a ministry, and it's less effective, and it doesn't even address the basic needs we have. As to say, it wasn't meant to be like that. It was meant to be entirely different. But they didn't listen to us. They did what they wanted, underfunded it, and destroyed it within the first year of the coalition. I guess the short answer is no.
Yeah, it's a scale question, right? It's like not
Yeah.
just tweaking around the edges, but like that systemic reform, but also the funding side, right? So if you change the laws and then you defund their implementation to the death, what have you got? Rebecca, did you want to add anything onto that question?
I think that's fundamentally what's happening there is when you start aligning your laws with things like the United Nations bills of the UNCRPD and a human rights approach, you are undermining neoliberalism and you're taking a different approach. And I think that's partly why our successive governments have been so reluctant, because it is a big shift away from a neoliberal ideal.
You. Okay. There's another legal question here, which I'll just ask, and if anyone knows the answer to it. I think this also draws back to the Public Health, scrolling issues, Public Health and Disability Act 2000. Are there any plans to review that act, or have a Persons with Disabilities Act as a standalone? Anyone know whether Public Health and Disability Act is going to be reviewed?
Hannah here. I don't know when it's being reviewed, but the intention of the Act, it's not a Disabilities Act. It was basically setting up the ethics committees, Ministry of Health, and it was to design certain policies that included. We don't have a Disabilities Act. That is not our legislation. We have anti-discrimination sitting within the Health and the Human Rights Act, and we have access to goods and services sitting under the Health and Disability Commissioners Act. But the Public Health and Disability Act was more about setting up the ethics committees and how the government were going to function in health and disability systems. But it's not an act, it's not a Disabilities Act. We don't have one.
Yes, indeed. Another question here is about the Health and Disability Commission. This question says, didn't apply to welfare and social supports. Why not? When disabled people are so dependent on that. So I think the question is, where is the monitoring system for and the review and complaint system, and would it be stronger under the HDC? I think that's where that person might be heading. Does anyone want to speak to that?
I could speak to it again. The HDC Code of Rights is about goods and services and sets out the 11 Code of Rights. If you're in breach of that, accessing health and disability services, then you've got a case. But 15 years sitting on the Human Rights Review Tribunal, very few disabled took a case of discrimination under that, of health discrimination under that legislation. Again, it's not a Disabilities Act. They don't have a Disabilities Commissioner. It's to deal with goods and services and accessing our health and disability services only.
Thank you, Dr. Hu. I'm going to give one to Kali now. If you're happy to try this one, which is, should government departments be working more closely together, for example, family court and work and income? And I wonder if maybe the angle you could try on this one is in acknowledging the gaps that people with chronic illness tend to fall between within government departments. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, in my field of policy, it is always a recommendation of every piece of work that I do that government departments should work more closely together. I just have this remarkable inability to actually pull together somehow. They've been trying. It's mostly to do with how the ministers, how the whole government system is set up, with ministers responsible for different portfolios and different budgets, and everyone competing for money here and there, and people not wanting to spend money. But it's it kind of requires overall, fundamental system transformation to get that sorted out and to have budgets that are sort of I guess, transparent across lines so that you can see that if you're spending money over here, it's saving money here, and therefore we should do this most logical thing of spending money here. But we seem to really struggle with doing that within the current system. So at the moment there's we've got ACC, and then we've got Ministry of Health, and then we've got Disabilities Ministry, and those three are all doing little bits of the same thing. And I'm not an expert in this, so I don't want to. I think probably Rebecca or whānau could say better than me exactly how it should look. But I feel like, people who have similar levels of ability should be getting similar levels of support, whether they're getting it from different agencies or the same agency. But the way it's working currently is definitely not working.
Thank you. Did either Rebecca or whānau want to chip in on that too?
Back prior to the 1980s, if you talk to parents back then, they had a social worker, and the social worker did all the systems navigation for them. And so instead of parents trying to figure out the system and figure out what to ask for, who to ask, or how to frame it, or what to apply for, the social worker did all of that. So you had one point of contact that did all of that background admin work for you. Now, clearly that all got eliminated because that was far too expensive for the state. But again, we could do that. You could have a front facing, and it shouldn't matter whether you're ACC or disability or a medical long-term condition. The front facing part of the state that you engage with could be the same. And then it's the role of the state and behind that to figure out which government department's paying for what.
Thank you. Okay, so I think part of my role is timekeeping, so I'm going to pause us there. And apologies to those whose comments in the chat we haven't fully acknowledged. But thank you very much to our panel. There's a really good wide-ranging kōrero, all the panels building on each other. And my final thing to let you know is, in case you happen to be leaving us now before the break, I believe that someone will put in the chat an evaluation form for this webinar. However, if you are staying for the rest of the session, please listen to the rest of the session and then fill in the survey at the end. So ngā mihi kia koutou, and I'll hand back to Rebecca, maybe? I don't know, but I think we're taking a break.
I mean, there's nothing else for me to say other than the links in the chat. If you're leaving, please fill that out and give us some quick feedback. Super important and valuable for our funders to be able to show them what we've been doing. And yes, we will come back at 10:45. So see you all soon. Kia ora koutou. We're at 10:45, so let me welcome you all back again for the second half of our webinar. I hope you all had a good break, had enough time to grab a glass of water or anything else you might have needed. We're going to move on now to our third panel, the deciders. So let me welcome the moderator for the deciders, Lee Warren, here we are. Kia ora, Lee. Lovely to have you here. Let me hand it over to you.
I am unmuted.
I can hear you fine.
Perfect. Kia ora koutou, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be a moderator in this group. Everything I've heard so far really reiterates my understanding of where we're at as well. That there's been a lot of work that's been done, but there's still more work that needs to be done. And that's why we're here today, to keep this process and the ball rolling forward, so to speak. So this is the decider panel. There is 5 minutes for each person to answer their proposed question and introduce themselves. And the question is with their initial statement as well. And the initial question is, what is the role of the social support and welfare system in the process of equity and access for people with disabilities? So we have 4 people in this panel group: Alistair Mason, Anne Shaw, Ben O'Hara, and Sean Coleman. If I have pronounce your name or said your name wrong, please do correct me when you introduce yourself again. That would be fantastic. So we'll start with Alistair Mason, the Director of Social Investment Agency. Thank you, Alistair.
Kia ora koutou, you can hear me all well? Fantastic. Let me introduce myself. I'm Alistair Mason. If you might have gathered through the recent news, I've changed my title quite recently. I'm now Acting Chief Executive of the Social Investment Agency. But allow me to speak. How much I can directly answer the question within our remit. I think the best thing to do is to give an overview of our work, and you can decide on that. So, starters, thank you for inviting me to take part in this. I'd like to talk about the Social Investment Agency and its role in the social support system to promote inclusion and belonging for people with disabilities. Social investment is about enabling people, whānau, families and communities to achieve outcomes and thrive by using data, evidence and different ways of working. What we aim to do here at the Social Investment Agency is lead change across the public sector to transform how it works and invests in the social sector. As a central agency, our role is to provide system leadership and oversight of social investment commissioning. We're transforming social sector spending to ensure that resources are directed to where they have the most impact and investments focus on outcomes, not outputs. We're ensuring that communities have the ability to commission services that meet local needs and that people with the highest needs get access to tailored services and support that work for them. We analyse information held in the integrated data infrastructure to form evidence and insights to inform our work. Government holds vast amounts of information about New Zealanders in the IDI, which is held by Stats New Zealand. This is linked administrative data from across government, health records, education records, justice interactions, benefit history, housing data. It's an extraordinary resource which when used well, allows us to understand patterns across people's lives and identify where intervention can make the most difference. So how is SIA using data and insights to improve outcomes for people with disabilities? Community and research evidence tells us that disabled people are often underserved by government services and face disadvantage across a range of social and economic domains. This means it is important for the evidence that guides policy and practice to highlight the experiences and outcomes of disabled people. However, most administrative data collections tend not to capture adequate measures of disability, making it a challenge for researchers to routinely identify and focus on disabled people. In 2022, the Social Investment Agency, then called the Social Wellbeing Agency, worked with experts in disabled people's organisations and in government to create a new indicator that can be used to explore outcomes for disabled people. The indicator is intended to be used by researchers in collaboration with disabled people to understand the experience and outcomes of disabled people. Essentially, it is a code file that can be run within the IDI to create a new data set focused on just disability. Measuring disability is a complex and still evolving issue. Our work to identify people who are likely to be disabled can be used to undertake research with and about disabled people in order to describe outcomes and experiences, evaluate supports, or improve system-level policies. We hope this enables a broader understanding of the experience of disabled people and how the government can better support them to achieve their aspirations. We believe the creation of this indicator opens up the possibility for many different uses of evidence to help and support the disabled community, including research, evaluations, and regular monitoring. Another way we're creating impact is through the Social Investment Fund, which we launched earlier this year. It provides funding under 4 pathways for initiatives that can provide tangible examples of the social investment approach in practice. In its early stages, the intent was to enable commissioners to test how outcomes-based agreements, data sharing approaches, and protocols in impact analysis and reporting before scaling these approaches in the first round of the fund. One of the 3 pilot initiatives selected in the initial stages was Autism New Zealand. Autism New Zealand's initiative, called Early Years Support, provides early identification and support for whānau and educators to understand the needs of autistic children and children showing signs of autism. The 4-year program will provide support for around 200 children. As part of the program, whānau will receive intensive support with workshops, home visits and coaching to learn ways to support their child. Educators and other professionals in the child's education setting are also providing training and support. There's ongoing support from the age of 2 for at home and in early childhood education, including the transition to school and building life skills. This investment will test evaluation of cutting-edge identification and support services for families with young children showing early signs of autism. If successful, the initiative could change the support for hundreds of families. In wrap up, we are keen to work with the sector to provide tools and insights that will make a real difference in the lives of people with disabilities. I'm looking forward to an ongoing conversation. Thank you.
There we are. I thought I'd muted myself. I had. Thank you, Alistair. That's fantastic. It's an incredible fund. That sounds like that's going to do a lot of benefit for a lot of people. So next we have Anne Shaw, the Deputy Chief Executive, DSS and Ministry of Social Development.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Anne Shaw tōku ingoa. And no mai haere mai, lovely to be with you all today. As Lee said, I am the Deputy Chief Executive for Disability Support Services, which now sits within the Ministry of Social Development, and it's really delightful to be with you all today, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this important kōrero for change. It's a real privilege to be able to contribute to this really important mahi. And thank you, Lee, for your welcome, and also to Melody, our interpreter, and thanks, Alistair, for your insights on the great work that the SIA are doing. And we're pleased that you've taken out time from your very busy and further busy work schedule that you have now as Acting Chief Executive. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the work that Disability Support Services are doing. Many of you may well be familiar with Disability Support Services, but I know services for those with disabilities can be quite complex to navigate. So I thought I'd tell you what we're here to do. So we sit within MSD. We came across from Whaikaha following the findings of the independent review back in September last year. And largely our job is to commission and fund a range of disability providers and community partners to deliver disability support services to disabled people and their whānau and carers, focusing on removing those barriers that exist. We have a really important stewardship role too. We want to really focus on improving the quality and the safety of those supports and services we fund. And that's around $2.7 billion every year. So it's not a small amount of money. And every day we have around 55,000 disabled New Zealanders that access those services and ensure that they get the disability support services they need. To access those services, they come through either our NASCs, our Need Assessment Service Coordination Services, or our 3 Enabling Good Life sites. We also fund around 100,000, I should say, requests for equipment and modification services, both for those with a disability, but also those with health needs as well. And lastly, we provide child development services. So when we're talking about children with autism, that's a hugely important part of supporting those whānau to understand and support them with assessments. Okay, well, as you know, and this won't be news to any of you, the demand for disability services continues to grow, and we've been focused on stabilising the system so we can manage both the increase in costs and support more people with better services that meet their needs. We're really and hugely committed to improving outcomes for disabled people. We know that there's a lot of improvement needed, and we know that we need to make those disability support services far more fair, consistent, as well as being financially sustainable. While we've had huge investment into the system, I know many of you may feel that you may not see that as enough. We want to provide more certainty into the future for our disabled people, their families and whānau. We are really focused on alignment with our enabling good lives principles, things like mainstream first, services that are easy to use, mana enhancing, and that's hugely important to the changes that we're looking to make. As I said before, we're also focused on supporting the wider Crown's response into the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse and Care, and ensuring that those services that we provide are quality and safe services that we can prevent and identify and respond to, sadly, the abuse that has existed in services across the Crown. We also really need to focus on our tangata whaikaha and our Pacific people with disabilities to ensure that we've got more culturally responsive services and support. We really want to and are committed to engaging with the wider disability community, and you may have come to some of the hui that we ran earlier this year. You might have responded to our survey. If you did, thank you. Your views are hugely important to changing the system that we have at this point. We'll be coming out further to continue to talk to you about things that we are doing. The changes in what we heard from communities earlier this year have resulted in changes to flexible funding. Many of you will be familiar with the Minister's announcement back in September, but we're committed to a nationally consistent assessment system where people are getting fair and consistent assessment that is based on not just their good lives, but also those of their whānau and carers and involving them in those systems. We're implementing those changes from the 1st of February if you're a new client into disability support services, or from the 1st of April if you are already a DSS, receiving DSS support. Those changes will mean that we're in a good place and we can lift those purchasing guidelines that we have heard from, I think, almost all of you that were very frustrating, limited the choice that you had, and certainly didn't enable your good lives. So we are really committed to doing that next year, and we're working at pace to do that. Those assessment processes will be consistent both across our NAS but also across our 3 Enabling Good Life sites who have all agreed to come on board, which we're delighted about. So we'll have that one nationally consistent approach. We also recognise that there's a huge amount more we can do to actually help you navigate the system. It's complex, it's hard to understand, it's really hard to know what we're here to do, what others are here to do, and we need to make those pathways clearer, more easy to able to understand, as well as consistent. So we'll be working alongside those Disability Information Advisory Services, or DIAS for short, that we also fund and support. We need to also work across the government system, whether it's with education, health, rangatamariki, ACC. We've got to make sure that we've got consistent services across government. So we'll be supporting and working with our colleagues across government to do that, to leverage their expertise in systems, and to think about how we can do things better together. So finally, look, we're really committed to being a steward of that system, driving continuous improvement, breaking down disability barriers, and providing those services that are both what disabled New Zealanders need, high quality, and provide safe services. We need to keep listening to the community. You are hugely important to us. You are the people that we're providing services for. So great to be here today. And clearly we've made some progress, but there's a huge amount to do. And I think I'm really excited about the move to strengthen the system and think about actually what else can we be doing. And I probably have overtaken my time. Giving me the microphone is always a dangerous thing to do, Lee. So I will hand over to my colleague in whakaha, Ben O'Meara. Kia ora.
Thank you, Anne. Ben, chair's all yours.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ben O'Meara taku ingoa. So I work for Whaikaha as a Deputy Chief Executive, and thanks also from me for the opportunity to speak today. I guess the first thing I want to say is that all of us in government have a role in supporting disabled people to contribute and participate. And we know that income supports, employment and housing are all critical aspects of the social sector that contribute to belonging and participation of disabled people. And our vision at Whaikaha is disabled people thriving in New Zealand. Our roles across government, so we support other agencies, particularly that have lead roles like MSD, education, health and others to do those roles in ways that align with the evidence and data that we have about disabled people. And we've had a few instances in the kōrero today where I think our evidence is not always as good as it could be, and I particularly think about the evidence base we have about long-term health conditions and the impact that they have on people and how that feeds into our disability thinking. Whaikaha leads the New Zealand Disability Strategy, the New Zealand Sign Language Strategy, our response to the UNCRPD observations, which New Zealand received in 2022 from the UN Committee, and the government's accessibility work program. Excuse me. We also provide support on cross-government targets to other agencies who are leading those targets in terms of the best ways to achieve those for disabled people so that we have equitable outcomes across those targets. And we know that there are additional costs of having a disability. We have evidence of that, and MSD's actually produced some additional material on that this year that I'm sure will be a useful resource for people. We also know that income supports are often a primary source of income for disabled people. But I'm going to focus a little bit in the remainder of my kōrero about access to work, which is not to diminish the role of income supports, but it is a key feature in the disability strategy. So I thought I would focus there. So the disability strategy was launched on 2 December of last week. I've heard at least one mention of it already today around the kind of principles that are in there and the role of enabling good lives and its connection, the connection between the disability strategy and enabling good lives. Other principles in the strategy relate to things like accessibility, self-determination, equity, participation, and respect for disabled people. The strategy has 5 outcome areas, all of which link to social outcomes for disabled people, so education, employment, health, housing, and justice. Employment is a focus in the strategy in recognition that over the medium term, it has the potential to improve incomes for disabled people. And while employment is an important economic thing, it's also important from the perspective of connection and well-being. And the evidence shows that employment has wider benefits beyond the income that it provides. Also, we know from the evidence that 3/4 of disabled people, disabled adults who are not working, would like to be working. So that's a lot. But consultation on the disability strategy highlighted barriers that people encounter around employment. Employer discrimination was highlighted, regional gaps in employment services, and benefit settings that can disadvantage people taking up employment. And I think those have already been talked about today as well. These are all things that whaikaha can work on over time. Disabled people have also said that government should be a model in terms of the way that employment is promoted. And so one of the things we've done around that recently is to establish a cross-government summer internship program, which currently has 13 graduates, some of whom who haven't had an opportunity to get started in the public service, working across 10 government agencies for the summer, which will hopefully provide a really good starting out place for employment. Interestingly, that's how I started in the public service a long time ago. We also know that from an economy-wide perspective, greater employment levels for disabled people have the potential to make a real difference. So some of the research that's been done by whaikaha shows that we could get a gain in GDP of over $400 million per annum if rates of employment of disabled people were improved. And we'd get an even greater gain than that if educational achievement could be supported to be lifted alongside those employment gains. We also know that workplace supports and adjustments like assistive technology would really lift participation rates, often at not significant cost for employers, and that services that fund accommodations such as New Zealand Sign Language interpreters in the workplace are really important. So in conclusion, we know that disabled people are an underutilised talent pool, and that all of us, from government through to employers and within the community in terms of the attitudes that people have towards disabled people, can play a role in lifting participation of disabled people. The disability strategy includes some concrete actions around this in terms of building employer awareness and capability. And it also includes a review of employment supports over the 5-year period in conjunction with disabled people. The principles of enabling good lives will guide this work. So in summary, I guess I just want to highlight that inclusion is really the key thing to focus on in terms of ensuring that the diverse needs of disabled people can be met by both the welfare system and our employment settings. And say thanks again for having me here today. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate your kōrero. Nice words there. And again, moving forward, sorry, I'm not going to say much in between because we are running short on time. And I'm introducing Sean Coleman, who's the Regional Commissioner, the Ministry of Social Development for Taranaki and the King Country. Thank you for your time, Sean.
Thank you. Can I just check that you can hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, because it says I'm on mute. Kia ora tātou. Yes, Sean Coleman, Regional Commissioner in Taranaki, King Country and Whanganui. I'm a late replacement today, but really happy to be able to come along. So, great to hear so much honest, open opinion, very thought-provoking and right on the money, clearly. As has been pointed out already today, the wider policy settings made by ministers and government in relation to, the types of benefits, the rates of payments and eligibility, etc. And then MSD or working income or WINS, as a lot of people know us, we then apply those settings. So we do provide services to most New Zealanders at some point in their lives. And I think, despite what I've just said, that should be a good experience, and we should treat people well and in a timely fashion. And I acknowledge that that is not always the case, and obviously welcome that feedback and those questions that are coming through. You'll know a lot about supported living payments, job seeker, health condition, disabilities, and later on in life, people transitioning over to New Zealand Super with disabilities. Also, been a lot of talk today about disability allowance, child disability allowance. We even have special disability allowances, and so perhaps a name change is in there too. As Dr. Hickey pointed out, around half of all people on benefit have a health condition or disability, or are caring for somebody, with a health condition or disability. It's safe to say, fair to say, our systems are complex and are not always easy for everyone to navigate. It's encouraging that MSD does have approval to, modernise and transform how we operate, but that is a multi-year, plan. So it's sort of one of those things. It's going to happen, but it's not going to happen overnight. My hope there is that it streamlines the benefit system and makes access to income support a lot easier, and then that would free up the time of our case managers and staff to actually work more constructively with people to help move them forward. We are bound by the Social Security Act, and that currently has requirements to collect and verify certain information. But I think we have improved. But yes, there's obviously further opportunities to streamline how that works. As has already been mentioned, we know people with disabilities are more likely to be in work which is not permanent or have periods of unemployment. We also know that some suitable paid employment is beneficial to people's well-being. Frustration I hear regularly from some people is, why do I have to keep telling MSD I have a disability? And I think it's come through in the questions. So we hear that. I guess try and put a bit of context around that, the regular check-ins. In many cases, this is about people's ability to work, and their ability to work can change over time. So I think it's about, when we talk about medical certificates, so we call it a work capacity medical certificate. So we're actually looking at, people's ability to work and actually support them where that is the right thing for them. And it's just mentioned how many people actually want to work, which is great. The talent and skills in that pool needs to be recognised more. So yes, we do rely on the medical profession to provide that medical certificate, but there are cases where we can make decisions, simplified access based on information that we already know and already hold in our system. So we've talked about why do we have to review every 2 years and confirm that we're still disabled. About 40% of our recipients of supported living payment currently do not have to reconfirm. They are on a never reassess. So depending on the disability and the condition, there's either a 2-year review or a never reassess. So it's not as black and white as everybody needs to reassess. Where employment is appropriate, we are here to help as well. So it was lovely to hear Ben talk about, the employment side as well. So yes, we want to pay people everything that they're entitled to at the right rate and at the right time. But also, we want to help people when the time is right to get to work. We acknowledge that we don't have all the expertise, so we also work with other organisations such as Workbridge, to help job seekers with disabilities to bridge that gap. Every person is different. We try and tailor our support, to acknowledge that. So there isn't. It's definitely not a case of one size fits all, and we know that. We do have a lot of case managers, a lot of staff. We do acknowledge that not all of them are experts in dealing with people with disabilities. We do have some expertise and regional staff able to support our staff, and we encourage them to use them. That's from a benefit entitlement perspective and also a return to work perspective. So that's really just what I wanted to say. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions, and I may not be able to get through them all today, but I'll definitely make sure that all questions get answered as a result of the conversation today. So thank you for the opportunity.
Kia ora. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate your time and your quickness in your approach there. I also like the way you said treating people with respect and in a timely fashion as well. Thank you. We're going to jump straight into the Q&A. I myself am actually disabled and in a wheelchair, but I'm not at the moment. I'm laying down because I have a small pressure area. So one needs to do what one can when one can. So one of the questions we have here looks like it's directed to Alistair on behalf of the Social Investment Agency. Do they have an opinion on the previous speaker's comments about chronic illness not being counted as a disability and therefore making it harder to gain support that is desperately needed for those individuals?
I think my response to that question will be, it's not my place to decide. I will defer to my colleagues in Whaikaha and MSD to get their opinions about that. But also hearing from the communities that are affected by this, we'll always have an open mind. Definitions of disability is an area of ongoing debate and discussion. And I think my role is to implement where those discussions lie, not necessarily having a strong opinion about it.
Okay. Does anyone else have, Ben, would you like from Whaikaha like to say anything to that?
Kia ora. I think ultimately we would like to move in New Zealand towards a model of disability that is more based around what is often described as the Washington set of questions. So what are the functional limitations that people need to overcome, and how do we support those? Our challenge is that as we broaden the availability of supports, and we have done that in some instances over the past 20 years, we also have to find the funding to make sure that we can do that. And so there are some groups who are not eligible for key disability support. So FASD is another one that's often talked about, and also long-term health conditions. And so I think this is a matter of ongoing discussion and questions around affordability that we'll continue to talk about. Yeah.
Kia ora. Thank you, Ben. I have another question here from a person asking, sometimes disabled people, and again, it would be great to get your comments, possible answers on this. Sometimes disabled people being at risk in an emergency evacuation is sometimes cited as being a reason for not employing them. Anyone like to talk to that?
Maybe I'd jump in there again. It's Ben here. I think the key thing about employing disabled people is identifying upfront what the adjustments are that are needed. I know for me, being blind, it's best to have a conversation about those things at the start to figure out what's needed. And often it's not as hard as everybody might think. So even things like egress in an emergency, if that can be planned for, or some small adjustments made, again, assistive technology, which I talked about. So I think often and I think speakers have talked about this morning, the lack of information about how to go about doing things is often a real barrier to finding solutions. And I think that's particularly can be the case in the employment space as well.
Thank you. It comes down to knowledge, whether it's from the individuals, from the want-to-be employee, or from the employer. Anyone else have a comment on that? No. Okay, I'll move on. There's a question here. Will the new indicator co-designed for or by disabled people be used in the next census or the household disability survey? And is there a link about this new indicator? We only have about 3 minutes left, by the way.
That's Alistair here. I'll start to answer that by saying it's a very, very good question. And I'm not sure if Ben has an input into it. It's one of those ones that I will go and look into, because I'm not sure stats is leading that bit of work. It is a very important consideration, I think.
Ben here, how about we follow up on that one afterwards? There must be a way to come back to Kimberly or others. Yeah.
Yes, there is. The Q&A, I understand, can still be answered. So that would be really good to get back to those questions and answer them afterwards as well. Thank you very much.
There are big changes around census at the moment that we'll have to work out how all that fits in. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Another question, just as we start to wrap up. Why is there a disability liaison caseworker sitting within the work and income branches?
Why isn't there?
What isn't there? Sorry. Yeah. I'm dyslexic. I'm English. Obviously, I got problem with the language. Yeah.
Some years ago, Sean speaking, by the way, sorry. Some years ago, we did actually go out and seek people with medical expertise to join our case management team. That was some time ago, but we do have regional health and regional disability advisors in each of our regions, and so case manager job is you have to have a lot of knowledge, and I don't think we can expect them to know everything about everything, but we do have the regional health expertise and disability expertise, and we also have advisors at a national level, at a principal level. So I think it's one of those things where we don't have to know everything ourselves, but we have to know where to find the information within MSD and Work and Income. But I think going forward, and I probably should have said, we are about to start adding people with health conditions and disabilities to caseloads in some of the larger regions. So I think that's a massive positive because, like we said, there's the people that have the skills and the talent in that cohort. And so that's 4,000 clients by the end of this financial year will actually be case managed. And that has been a gap at the moment. So I'm really pleased to see that gap closing.
Fantastic. Thank you again, all of you, for your kōrero. Thank you, Sean, for answering that last question. Just like to wrap that up by saying that, yes, nothing about us without us is not just a slogan. It is for all of us. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and we'll move forwards to whatever happens next. Somebody else takes over, Kimberly comes on, magic happens.
Thanks, Lee. Thank you for moderating, and thank you to all the speakers. Really appreciate you coming on. As mentioned, there are several questions in the chat, and we will do our best to get these answered for you by our speakers who have kindly offered to do so. They may stay on and answer them, or they may just go away and think about it and then provide us some answers via email later. So we'll keep you posted depending on how that works for our respective speakers. We're moving now to our fourth and final panel. Marvellous, exciting, looking forward to this one. The moderator for our doers panel is Patty Poor, who is the Policy Advisor for Disabled Persons Assembly. Delighted to have her joining us. Patty, I will hand it over to you. Take us away.
Tēnā tātou e ngā ki ngā haua e whā, tēnei te mihi nunui ki a takuta Rebecca Graham I tana karakia me tana whakatakinga I tēnei kaupapa rongonui, nau mai haere mai ki ngā kai kōrero I te kaupapa o ngā mana o ngā tangata whaikaha katoa. No reira, kia ora mai tātou katoa. So, firstly, I just wanted to, I acknowledged everyone in my welcoming everyone from the four winds, from the four winds that blow. So acknowledging our participants, Access Matters Aotearoa and the work that they do, and also our speakers and our panelists, and our moderators. So I just want to acknowledge everyone here. But very grateful for your prayer, Rebecca, and for your introduction. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction of our panelists. Sorry, aroha mai, like Dr. Huhana, I have also just recovered from a cold, so I have a little bit of a cough left over. But I'd like to introduce Kiri Tapu Murray, who is a General Manager Southern for CCS Disability Action. And following Kiri Tapu will be Joy Lanini, who is the National Manager for Your Way Kia Roha. And then following Joy will be Sonia Hawea, who is the CEO for Kai Karanga. So no mai haere mai, welcome to our panelists to this very important kaupapa around the mana of people with disabilities. So as mentioned before, each panelist has 5 minutes to just to make a statement around the question, apologies, what is the role of the social support and welfare system in the process of access and belonging for people with disabilities. And after each panelist has spoken, we'll go through questions from our participants. So I'd like to hand it over to Kiri Tapu, ngā mihi nunui.
Kia ora, is that working now? Ka pai. Kia ora tātou, Kiri Tapu speaking. Aura ki te mauka, waitaki te awa, kaitahu te iwi, te maiharo o te whānau. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this important kōrero. At CCS Disability Action, our foundation is Te Hunga Haua Māori mō ngā tangata katoa. We believe every person holds unique Māori, a life force that seeks connection. The question today is, does our welfare system protect that Māori or does it dim it? That's my version of the question today. From where I sit, leading service delivery in the South, I see a system that's often transactional and not relational. It can act as a gatekeeper, asking people to prove their deficit to get the basics of life, rather than asking them what they need to belong. When we talk about the role of the social support and welfare system, we're talking about how we uphold mana motuhake, the dignity, rights and aspirations of disabled people and their whānau. Inclusion and belonging are not just ideals, they're fundamental human rights, and our systems must reflect that. Deep breaths. First, the welfare system must act as a bridge and not a barrier. We are set up to fail when our processes are so complex and deficit-based and designed around proving incapacity. This erodes trust and dignity. Instead, we need systems that start from a position of belief, believing in people's strengths, their aspirations, and their rights to fully participate in society across their communities. Second, inclusion means flexibility and partnership. Support should be designed by and with disabled communities, not for them. This is the essence of enabling good lives. Person-directed, culturally grounded and responsive to diverse needs. For whānau haua, tangata whaikaha Māori, this means embedding te tiriti o Waitangi and Māori worldviews into policy and practice, ensuring whānau-centred approaches that honour mana and connection. Another deep breath. Third, belonging requires more than financial assistance. It's about creating pathways to education, employment, housing and community life. I see this daily in our mahi. A whānau can have income support, but if they can't get to the supermarket, they're still excluded. If they can't get access to a job interview because of transport, they're still sidelined. Welfare should enable, not restrict, these opportunities. That means removing systemic ableism, addressing unconscious bias, and ensuring accessibility in every interaction, from forms and digital systems to frontline services. And finally, the role of welfare is to uphold equity. And equity, as we know, is not giving everyone the same. It's giving people what they need to survive and thrive. For disabled people, that often means tailored support, timely interventions, and recognition of the real cost of disability. When we get this right, we don't just support those individuals, we strengthen our communities. In short, the welfare system must move from compliance to compassion, from control to collaboration. It should be a genuine partner in creating a society where every person, disabled or not, feels valued, connected, and able to live a good life. He waka eke noa. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kiri Tapu. Thank you for sharing, and I do love the work that I see happening in CCS with both our children and our adults, and know that it is about the individual and the whānau and the communities around us. So mihi nui i tō kōrero. Thank you very much for your conversation. And aroha mai. So I'm just handing over to Joy.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Joylanini tuku ingoa. I am Te Ara Tūtira, the National Manager for Connections and Funding at Your Way Kia Roha. So Connections and Funding is a service by the Ministry of Social Development. We provide a couple of key services. One is needs assessment and service coordination. So commonly known as NASC, which sometimes sounds like a swear word depending on who's saying it and how, and local area coordination. So our services are in various parts of the country. Our role really is delivering the policies and set by MSD as particularly in the needs assessment area. We work with about 8,000 disabled people. Over 50% of our staff have lived experience of disability. For me, when I've been considering, I've considered a whole lot of things. So what would I like to see? What would we like to see as an organisation? A more livable income for disabled people, free grief counselling for disabled people and whānau. I see many people coming into the system who are struggling with the diagnosis, parents really struggling with what this really means for me, and I think that's a huge gap. Embedding te tiriti in all of the work that happens in the sector. The creation of more resources and information that start from the diagnosis. So getting some information from the GP or specialist and having flow throughs. I think there's more research required too about what times people, what are the potential times people need more and more information. A panelist earlier said that, they'd waited for sort of 3 years to find out bits and pieces. That's ridiculous. But I do know many people come into the system really overwhelmed. So actually understanding a little bit more about what points and how much is too much and how much might be enough would be really helpful, I think. But getting more information in accessible forms. We would like to see more services consistently available across the country, like formal respite. It's not available in every area. A system where disability, health and mental health NASCs, it's more cohesive, so people aren't being sent from one NASC to another. It's frustrating for them. It can actually be frustrating for us as well, trying to do that. So a more holistic approach to the health, disability and mental health needs that people have. And more disabled people involved in the development of policies and procedures. As an organisation, we try to do that we definitely work on that for the ones that we have, but overall, more resources for organisations like NASCs to ensure that we can provide a better service. At the moment, we have caseloads of 250 to 300 people per facilitator for us, and we know that doesn't always mean people get the best from us. That's what we're funded though to deliver. In my ideal world, it would be 100 people maximum. It's my ideal world. Flexibility about the review of supports from us, more flexibility in the policies, definitely more cohesion between government agencies and organisations like ours, and actually disabled people seen as a person who has needs, whether they're family violence related, crime related, and not just treated as, well, you're a disabled person, so somebody over there has to figure that out for you. Actually seen for who they are. That's it from me.
Righto, Joy. Thank you for sharing. And I hear a very similar theme with Kiritapu and yourself, that there is a need to actually really raise the need to support these services in order to lift the individual needs of disabled people. But there is also the need to fund that as well, because again, a caseload of 200 to 300 means that people aren't getting the quality of service that they need. So, and I think that's experienced by a number of different organisations that are mahi a te mahi, that are doing the work. So, ngā mihi, and thank you for your sharing. And love that you both talked about te tiriti. Tūtere o Waitangi. So I'd like to hand it over to Sonia, and love the name is someone who is a kaikaranga. So handing it over to you, Sonia.
Oh, tēnā koe. Can you hear me? Good. Ka pai. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Sonia Hawea taku ingoa, he uri o Ngāti Kahanganui ki Heretaunga, nā reira tēnā koutou katoa. Hi everyone, I'm Sonia. I'm the Chief Executive of Kaikaranga. I was born and raised in Hastings in the rohe of Kahanganui ki Heretaunga. I have also have roots in other parts of the motu as well, in Ngāti Toa, Tuwharetoa and Ngaitahu. Nā reira tēnā koutou. Thank you, Becca, for your karakia, and tēnā koe te kaiwhakahaere, Patty, for your welcome. I just want to acknowledge my colleagues on this panel as well, and Joy and I spoke briefly before the panel because it was important to both of us that we could bring value to this important kaupapa and these opportunities for conversations that cut across, the silos that exist in the systems that whānau and people have to navigate daily. So I thought there's already been so much, and there is so much rich sharing of solutions and ideas for how the issues that exist across the systems can be resolved. So I know that both the deciders and the creators and us doers are listening intently to those kōrero. Working within the social support system gives us the vantage point that is both privileged and confronting. Like Joy's organisation, we have an AS contract in Tamaki Makaurau, and that is from that position we see it's a privilege, but it is also confronting to see the intent of the strategies and policies, but also witness the realities that people are trying to work with, and also our teams are trying to navigate in the best way possible the moments of frustration and confusion at our complex rules and processes, and the fatigue and erosion of resilience that occurs when trying to navigate towards meaningful support that works in a way that values them and is delivered and provided and experienced with dignity. Like Joy, many of my colleagues are disabled people, carers, people living with whānau members who they support, tangata whaikaha Māori and tangata sa elima law. So their voices are very much part of our rōpū and our ways of working. I certainly echo many of the whakaaro that have been shared about a support system that is measured, that has some different measures as we move forward around autonomy, inclusion and the wellbeing of disabled people in whānau. And I just wanted to touch on the current environment that right now, as MSD is reshaping the support system, this is an opportunity to build and develop a system that is dignified, equitable and just, and actually harks back to many of those whakaaro that did come from the welfare working group that are still very relevant today. I think what I wanted to bring to the kōrero too as a doer in this panel is examples of what Joy referenced about the importance of trying to bring systems together, that we've seen our role and the role that we play as a NASC is to advocate, to strengthen and simplify the system within disability support, and also to strengthen the interface with other systems that people and whānau are also having to navigate each day. And I had some examples that I wanted to share that I think hold validate some of the ideas and solutions that are really on offer for our system leaders and architects to pay heed to. Dr. Hu mentioned the experiences and changes that were able to be made quite quickly during times of crisis, during COVID, when there was that ability to flex and adapt to what people needed. We saw whānau and disabled people needing to provide ways to support themselves during those times. And we saw a real willingness between those systems to flex and meet need, irrespective of how that need was determined. And I think we had an opportunity to, through a contract with MSD as a connector, to connect our function as a disability support provider with being a connector, and to really amplify the connection between disability support and social support during that time. I think that in that initiative itself, it was funded through MSD, and augmenting that was also an initiative that we supported through Te Puni Kōkiri. And so I want to acknowledge Te Puni Kōkiri for their vision and acknowledging tangata whaikaha Māori whānau haua, and seeing the opportunity to bring social support together with disability support. And that initiative was mentioned in a report to the UN about how support systems can be better connected. I think the point that I want to leave is, pity I'm conscious of time, the point that I wanted to leave is that how do we learn from these examples where the evidence is clear in terms of the outcomes for disabled people and families, that when support systems work effectively together, these generate much better outcomes for people when they're more flexible. So the range of supports include those that are completely flexible and determined by people and families themselves without any restrictions, and also those ways of delivering other services are more meaningful. Then outcomes are much better for people, for their families, and for communities. So my question is my challenge is to us all is, how do we make those ways of working the norm and establish those learnings as part of a social system that is more fair and responsive and equitable moving forward? Kia ora.
Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. And thank you, Sonia. I just realised it's lucky I have my alarm on, because I didn't realise. I was like, oh, keeps on reminding me, 5 minutes. But it is great hearing the conversation around the awareness that for a lot of our whānau, our disabled whānau, and for their carers, and for the whānau as well, the system can be quite complex. And there is a comment from one of our participants around, which is quite relevant because I hear it from a lot of carers, although I as a disabled person know the importance of disabled people's voices. I know as well my partner who supports me, my whānau who supports me, the carers who and friends and community around me that support me are an important part, but some of them can be isolated, and it can be lonely when you're dealing with multiple agencies and multiple services. And yeah, you can get that fatigue. So I think it's the question of the specific question was, no one wants to hear your need for extra supports. So sometimes you're pushed aside or hung up on, and I myself have experienced that with NESC, ACC, Ministry of Health, and support agencies. So I suppose, how would you answer that question around people who need those extra supports, people who need those supports? If they've got someone on the phone who goes, sorry, you're not eligible because it's a health issue. Sorry, you're not eligible because it's not a disability we cover, or we don't have those supports. How would you manage that conversation?
Are you? Shall I ask?
Oh, sorry, and it's
Okay,
open
Joy,
to all
which
panel.
I don't
I know
mind.
that. I know it's a huge question, but I know it's a question I hear a lot.
Because I think I'd like to say the way that I expect my teams to answer that, but then, an individual person in my team may not have answered the way that they're expected to. So I'll firstly say that. Secondly, and I guess some of that comes down to the workload that I talked about. It's really, and that's not an excuse, but it is really hard sometimes. The other thing though is, we do say you should handhold the person over to somewhere else if it's not us, not just say this is it, it's for you to call the other agency. That our team should be hand holding that over. So sometimes I think that the best approach is we will call that agency as well, but if you call as well, because that also means you're getting twice, because some people say, well, they then will respond to you, I don't know. I do think it can be complex, and that's why I said before, I thought particularly in the NASC space, sorry, I will slow down, NASC space, it would just be easier if we could work in a more coordinated way, but we've got different NASCs, 4 different types of NASCs working, and that's, sometimes we butt heads about where things should be, and if it was just more cohesive, then that wouldn't happen, as an example. But ideally, we should handhold people over to something else.
And I also support the conversation of the need for more funding, because if you have more funding, you can actually staff the needs. Because I've seen organisations that have had the funding, and it means that you can have the staff to handhold, or versus someone who only has 10 or 15 minutes to quickly talk to someone before they have to talk to the next person. So I also understand the value of getting central government funding in order to fund the services we need. But I just realised, oh my gosh, my time's running out again. I forgot to put my timer back on again, but we still have another 5 minutes to answer any other questions. So I think, there was one other question. Sorry, I just have to go back again. Actually, that was a very, very relevant one, because I got asked this to ask how to make working income staff empathise with you. And it was a question around being compassionate. Now, this was around working income. How do you get your staff to show compassion for the people they're working with? Again, I know that's around capacity as well. And I also know, as someone who's worked in the sector, how it can be quite a lot of work when you also have a disability. But how would you, if you were talking to your staff, how would you bring that aspect of compassion? Would you hire people that were more compassionate? Would you teach them that compassion, provide education? How would you actually do that?
Shall I take this one to my fellow? I'll go first, Kiri Tabu, and then just take a minute. Kia ora for that question. Look, the challenge of working in a system alongside people who are users of the system and reliant on the system as well, makes it a very real reality. We are having those conversations across each other, that competition between our values and the challenges and what we'd like to be able to do, because we are people in the workforce who believe in justice, inclusion, manaakitanga, and often because of the constraints we've got, what we can do falls well short of our own personal aspirations, as well as what our communities want and very rarely need. That is a daily dilemma, and so it is really has become very real, as I guess a leader within the system and within the organisation, to maintain as much positivity and to motivate the support system as it's working through changes that hold a lot of promise, but are also coming with significant demands about getting to those points of changes, as Joy has touched on. people want to see working inside the system, want to see it improve. They need it to improve, and that's where the values come from. As much as possible, particularly through times of significant change, where rules change suddenly, or it can take even longer because systems are under pressure. And we're very much in the same boat as Joy touched on, around the times that people are waiting for our communication is far, far longer than what we would want them to be. So it is a daily challenge, and to get motivated and focused on the purpose, remind ourselves of the purpose that we're here for, and that what we bring to this mahi. Kia ora.
Kia ora, ngā mihi nunui, kia koutou katoa I tō hā, I te aroaro o hā, ne? So just wanted to thank you for the dignity and what you were sharing with all of us today. And I'd like to hand it back over to Dr. Rebecca Graham. So ngā mihi nunui. Oh, ngā mihi nunui.
Kia ora. Thank you, Patty, and thank you too to panelists Kiri Tapu, Joy and Sonia for sharing your time and your insights. Really valuable. Really appreciating the Q&A as well, because some of these are not easily answered, and yet in some ways some of them are very easily answered. So it's been great to listen to the discussion and see the questions coming through. As we close now, we're working very hard to break down ableism, and this has been a great 3 hours in highlighting some of those things and barriers and ideas that are permeating our social system and our welfare supports. Before the break, we put a survey link into the chat, and we'll put the link in again. Thanks, David. And this is important for us at Access Matters Aotearoa to be able to go back to our funders and say, you know, this is what we've done and this is how people found it valuable. For our panelists, speakers and moderators, you'll be sent out a different link via email in order to complete that. Just as we brought everyone into the space with a karakia, I'll close us out again using a karakia, and David's put that in the chat as well. And again, the idea that sort of sits in behind karakia is that it's a way of moving us in, through, and then out of the space again, acknowledging that we bring our whole selves into a conversation such as this, and it's just a nice way to close that out and then release us back into the other activities that we may have planned. So he anoi tātou, he karakia whakakapi. Kia whakaara te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia tura ki whakataha ai, kia tura ki whakataha ai, haumi e hui e tai. And in English, restrictions are moved aside so the pathway is clear to return to everyday activities, joined, gathered, entwined. Ngā mihi, thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely to have you here. Hope you found it really worthwhile and useful, and we'll be in touch. Ka kite.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.